Hi, thanks, Trevor. Great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. So, as an introduction, yes, Richard Brinson, as you say, I'm the CEO and founder of Savanti, and we are a practitioner-led cybersecurity consultancy with a focus on security leadership, strategy, and transformation services. So, we typically advise boards on security trends and what they mean and how to approach them. But we also, being practitioner-led, we also do a lot of hands-on security leadership for our clients. And from a personal point of view, I've had the honor to take the CISO role for a number of different clients that we work with, including several FTSE 100 companies. And I'm currently doing the CISO role for a large privately held company in Geneva. So it's a real honor really to look at so many different companies, different industries, different ways of doing things, different cultures, and seeing the different approaches, what works, what doesn't work. And all companies do something well. And it's nice to take those bits with you from every gig, effectively, that you do.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking the time to join us. I've got a few questions. So some I've collected from conversations with other people, and some that are purely just out of my own interest. And one of those is I'm always interested to know, as a CISO, how often do you actually sort of initiate strategic projects as opposed to reacting to something that may be happening? So it could be, recent breaches you've seen elsewhere, or trends, or compliance, or something like that. So how often are you reacting rather than going, well, my strategy is over there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's kind of I've got a mix of an answer. So genuinely, we are reacting all the time, constantly. It's just the nature of the industry, the nature of what we do. However, if you don't have a strategic plan, or you don't have at least the pillars of a plan that you can loosely stick to, you end up just running around with your hair on fire and trying to start every project under the sun as soon as you see some article about a threat or some new technology has a new silver bullet. So personally, I always take the approach of, typically once a year we do our long-term planning and set our strategic priorities for the year, but then give ourselves the sort of agility and flexibility to move around within those, particularly in terms of the sort of projects we swap in and swap out of these strategic pillars, and certainly the sequencing of the things that we may do within these. So as a pillar, we might say, this year, one of our three is identity, and we've got a huge focus on identity and access management this year. But as long as we're staying within the bounds of that sort of scope, what we do within that space, I try to keep fairly flexible and agile. So the answer is both. I'm not sure if that's the answer you were looking for, but we definitely have a strategic plan to guide us and try to keep the boundaries of what we do, but we also need to flex within that.
So the thing I was sort of thinking, is there like a hierarchy? Is it, if a compliance issue comes up, that that takes over than maybe some of the other things you were doing?
Possibly is the answer. I think compliance projects or regulatory projects tend to trump other projects, because if you can be in serious trouble if you don't comply with the law or do what the company needs to do. But it does vary quite dramatically depending on the industry that you're in and how highly regulated that industry is. Of course, we will always try and do our best and try and focus on those projects, but not at the expense of, for example, security hygiene. In my view, security hygiene as a pillar should always be your number one or number two program, because without that, it's easy to get distracted on sort of the latest things or the sexy projects or chasing the silver bullets. But unless you keep that core, doing the basics well, as one of your absolute key priorities, it's very easy to drop the ball.
Yeah, I heard from a customer a while ago who basically was saying that actually compliance almost slow sometimes it slows you. It stops you reaching the point you actually want to, because you're having to sort of tactically do that, and you're not achieving maybe some of the long-term goals that you want. Do you find is compliance sort of almost an inconvenience more than part of delivering security?
It can be an inconvenience, and it can be, at times a box checking exercise where, just because you're compliant with something doesn't mean you're secure. The two things, while they may be related, they definitely don't, coexist all the time. Mm-hmm. However, compliance can also be a great lever to get stuff done. When things are tagged with that compliance, bucket, if you like. The getting them through, getting extra funding because we have to do it, it is also a good thing as well. So it's a double-edged sword. Yes, we get distracted by them, and sometimes that you may not see the value in the compliance projects themselves in terms of real risk reduction, but in terms of an overall program and helping to increase your funding and helping to get things done, and of course keeping your stakeholders in legal and other places happy, it's it can be a good passenger to have on board.
Yeah, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of the time you get initiatives like Zero Trust and Zero Trust. We're talking today here. This is the Zero Trust Summit because obviously we want to talk about things like that. But there's I host a number of sort of roundtable sessions over the year, and there's a subject that keeps coming up time and time again, which is how do you engage with senior executives to get them to buy into the concept of something like Zero Trust?
It's a really difficult one with Zero Trust, just because of the name. I think we're in if you think most organizations are really trying to empower their people and trying to increase trust in the workforce and allow people more room to do more interesting things. So if you as a CISO, if you go into a boardroom and say, hey, here's my new plan, we're not going to trust anything anymore, and therefore no more security incidents, you get laughed out of that boardroom or thrown out of it quite possibly, and you probably won't be in your CISO role that long. The chief HR officer is going to hate that sort of language just because it's almost the antithesis of what they're trying to achieve. But I think you have to distill it down to some of the principles that support things like Zero Trust to make it real for them and make it easy to understand. As an example, whenever I'm asked about something like Zero Trust by an executive, the first example I give of what it means is say, okay, just thinking very simply about it. Don't trust something or someone just because it's on your network. Check it out, verify it, make sure the person is who they say they are, or the device is actually the device, and the context of what they're doing is appropriate for their role. So that's just a little bit of a they can get that. It's a little bit of an explainer. Secondly, we think about passwords. So most people understand that passwords are really not a great source of authentication data. They're not the best way forward. So when you talk about a future that possibly wouldn't need us to have passwords, everybody can get that, and everybody can understand. Okay, that sounds really interesting. Talk to me more about that. And then of course, segmentation. We talk about reducing the size of the blast radius so that if there is an incident, it's contained within a relatively small part of the business or a small part of the systems. And I think even just those three small examples, suddenly you're in a different conversation than trying to say, hey, we don't trust anything anymore, so we're all good.
Yeah, I guess that sort of leads on to an interesting thing, and there's obviously that, but also workers' councils that get involved in some of those discussions as well. But if you're going down that path, how do you get all of the groups that are involved? So you've got application owners and developers and networking people and network security people and how do you sort of line all those people up behind an initiative like Zero Trust?
Firstly with some caution in terms of how you approach it, but definitely with you have to have the ultimate top-down buy-in. Because if you try to do something that involves something stretching across multiple silos, like security, like networks, like infrastructure, like applications, where you're going to be changing the ways of working, but it doesn't have necessarily the visibility or the support of where all of those teams meet, then it's always going to be a bun fight for who's going to configure it, who's going to control it, who's going to own the break glass process when it goes wrong. So you really need that understanding, from the top down of the organization of actually, if we're going to do things in a different way, it means we need to organize our people differently. And if that means taking silos and creating multifunctional, cross-functional teams, then that's what you need to do. But also it's also how you measure those teams, because if you stick to people's original objectives, people within networking will have a different objective generally to people within security, which will be all about reducing risk. People within infrastructure might have objectives around scalability or something like that, which is not necessarily what security is being measured on. So I think when you create those cross-functional teams, they have to all understand the bigger picture. They have to understand what the business is trying to achieve by taking a different approach, and you have to measure them on the same things. Because if you measure, half of the team on, risk and risk reduction, the other half of the team on time to market, you're going to get a very fractured team. So you've got to be really, really cognizant of the motivating factors and the measurements that you put upon those teams, so that they can all, pull in the same direction. Because that is typically the challenge where you get people from different silos, is they have different objectives and they are measured on different things.
Mm-hmm. So given that with those, and you probably hit this several times, so when you have new technologies come along, but obviously there are traditional ways of doing things, or the way that companies have always done them, and you may see this going more as a external view onto some of these things. How do you integrate those new ways of doing things? So doing away with passwords or changing the way that segmentation works, and that. Is that an easy thing to do? Does that mean changing the way that people work, or is it purely a technology thing?
Definitely not just a technology thing. And actually, some of the biggest challenges that we have with large-scale security programs or other programs that involve a significant amount of business change and ways of working change is that, how do you change culture? Culture is far harder to change than standing up a new piece of technology. Tech is the easy bit to some extent. Yes, of course, there's always some challenges with integration or whatever, but getting people to change how they've worked, particularly when, in our world, we're largely trying to change the ways of working of IT administrators and people in those sorts of roles who have probably done the things they've done for a long time in the ways they've done them, trying to then say to them, right, suddenly it's all changed. I mean, you really have to take baby steps. You really have to, you have to have a lot of influence. You have to have a lot of top-down support. You have to have a lot of communications, a lot of training, and it's definitely not a big bang approach. Right?
Yep.
Unless you want a rebellion on your hands, it's definitely not a big bang approach. It's easy does it. We'll try this out, we'll pilot it small, we'll start with some insignificant things. We might set up a SWAT team as a multifunctional team to start looking at the new ways of working, and then get them feeding back to their own teams and to the wider tech communities typically on, is this a benefit or not? Do we really, can we really do this and work slightly differently? So yeah, very small steps, but you can't just allow that people's stubbornness to do things the way they've always done it to stand in the way. So a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick, and work it along.
And actually, finally, what do you think is the future for concepts like zero trust and all the other big things that people come along? Do you think they're here to stay? Is that the way forward, or because we're seeing various different initiatives from from different people, so BeyondCorp and all of these sort of things, is it a fashion, or do you think that type of way of working is here to stay?
Well, it's a little bit like the exact question that you asked in terms of, is it here to stay? It's kind of, we're all still asking ourselves a little bit, what is zero trust? And the reason we're asking that is because every vendor is telling us a different story, and we're in a sort of marketing hype curve with zero trust, where it's it's probably at its peak or near its peak. However, that's not to say it is just a marketing hype. There's a lot of really, really good principles within what we're trying to do in zero trust. It's just under this banner right now. I think since John Kindervag came up with the term when he was at Forrester about 7 or 8 years ago, it probably meant something different to him then when he thought about it than what it does to some of the marketing that we see right now. The term may stay, may not. My suspicion is the term will probably fall away in a few years. But nevertheless, the principles that are supporting it are absolutely things that we should be pushing forward and will stay. Who wouldn't want a passwordless future? Who wouldn't want no more VPNs? All of that sort of stuff. The commercial benefits of microsegmentation, where potentially we can stop investing in so many firewalls and save a huge amount of money on network security. They have to be exploited. So, yeah, I think the terminology may fall away, but the principles underpinning it, I think, are here to stay.
Brilliant. So we've actually run out of time now. Thank you for all your answers, and thank you for spending some time with us. And hopefully we'll see you soon at some further events.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Trevor.
Thank you.